Thousands of people have been protesting in Germany every week as Pegida took to the streets. The Greek elections has seen the radical leftist Syriza party succeed. In Spain, Podemos currently ranks second in the polls. IB Times UK spoke to experts about the reasons behind the emergence of these anti-establishment parties.
What we've seen over the last few years is a shift of the electorate from more establishment parties towards more anti-establishment parties and more anti-systemic parties. It ranges from Podemos in Spain and the Five Star Movement in Italy to Ukip in Britain and the National Front National in France. Obviously there are huge differences between these examples, but what they have in common, and Syriza does as well, is that they get the support of people who are angry because of their current situation or because of the perceived situation of the European Union, and they want to send a message to those who are in power.
Societies in Western Europe are getting more complex, and mainstream big tent parties struggle to hold together increasingly diverse electorates. There's the impact of the crisis, and there's the fact that politics isn't as straightforward as it once was. Once it was about economic issues. These days it's about that, but it's also about other issues, social issues, identity issues, the environment, and that makes for a very complicated political environment. Politicians increasingly are less able to deliver solutions than they once were in a kind of globalized world, and when they do try through projects like the European Union, they create quite a complicated structure that voters don't understand.
But while it seems that people everywhere in Europe are looking for alternatives to traditional politics, there are also noticeable regional differences.
In Northern Europe, Western Europe, it's tended to be parties of the radical right, the far right, which have made the running electorally. In Southern Europe, in Portugal, Greece, Spain, it's the radical left which has emerged. In Central and Eastern Europe, it's neither the radical left nor the radical right, but a new species of anti-political party set up by businessmen, by celebrities, by journalists, by people from outside the political class. They're very much about doing politics differently.
So while anti-establishment parties have seen a rapid rise throughout Europe, Western Europe in particular has seen xenophobic and anti-Muslim sentiment promoted by right-wing parties and far-right groups.
Es gibt Länder, wo Rechtsradikalität als Ideologie sehr stark in Parteien versammelt ist und auch diese Parteien durchaus Macht und Einfluss gewinnen können. Ich denke an Frankreich, der Front National, der ist also sehr stark. Entsprechende Parteien gibt es beispielsweise in Deutschland nicht. Dort wird Rechtsradikalität, also Rechtsradikalismus, Neonazismus, von Netzwerken ausgeführt und militanten Gruppen. Die sind also sehr stark am Ball und auch mit einem sehr starken Gewaltaufkommen, was in anderen Ländern wieder anders gestaltet ist. Wir können in Ländern wie in Ungarn sehen, dass also Rechtsradikale selbst in Regierungsverantwortung stecken oder auch in anderen Ländern Osteuropas Koalitionsregierungen gibt mit Rechtsradikalen. Also es ist sehr unterschiedlich verteilt.
The rise of disaffection with the mainstream has allowed these parties to stand as outsider figures who represent an alternative or pose as an alternative to the mainstream and offer strong-arm authoritarian solutions. So whatever rhetoric the mainstream adopts in targeting or scapegoating the Muslim population of France, for example, the Front National will go further, and this is a pattern that we've seen repeated for about 4 decades.
But while right-wing groups have benefited from the dissatisfaction of the mainstream, they've also been helped by the fact that right-wing parties of today are very different to those of previous decades.
Insiders and outsiders, or extreme and mainstream. This is no longer a distinction that always works. Look at a party like Ukip, look at a party like the Alternative for Germany. These are parties which are clearly very different and very challenging for the mainstream right, but are not the traditional extreme right with its kind of roots in neo-fascism.
You have groups like the Front National, the founders of the organisation, consciously attempted to mask direct affiliation to fascism behind a language and an appearance that courted respectability. And what's allowed them to get a foot in the door and to establish themselves as part of the mainstream is the establishment of immigration and national identity as central political issues, and that's where the response of the mainstream has also contributed to legitimising these organisations.
Noticeably, mainstream parties now highlight immigration as a key issue in their agenda to compete with right-wing parties for votes. So is there a danger that the already unstable European Union is becoming further destabilised by anti-establishment and far-right parties?
I think they're already destabilising certain countries, and I think they're contributing to an atmosphere of intolerance and of scapegoating that's exacerbating an already polarised situation against a backdrop of growing inequality, unemployment, falling social mobility.
They are not always particularly coalitionable, so if you look at a party like the Five Star Movement, it's in Italy, it's very clear an anti-party which doesn't want to go into coalition with anyone. They're also destabilising in the sense that they're often quite short-lived, and that makes it difficult for voters to hold governments accountable. If they do get into government, they're simply not around at the next election for voters to hold accountable. So it is problematic for democracy.
At the time when the European Union is facing huge pressures and challenges, there's questions about immigration, economic issues of security and foreign policy and so on, introducing an instability factor and questioning the foundations of the structure would be very dangerous.
With anti-establishment parties destabilising the very base of the European Union and far-right groups promoting xenophobia and anti-immigration sentiment, how much is being done to keep them under control?
Since the emergence of the organisation in the 1980s, there have been periodic demonstrations of quite considerable numbers against the Front National. What those anti-racist movements have failed to do is to build a consistent or durable anti-racist organisation. Over the last 5 to 10 years in particular, there's been a climate that's been created that has worked against the development of anti-racism, particularly when it comes to the stigmatisation of Muslims.
Die Politik ist gut beraten, zu versuchen, sich sehr stark vom Nationalismus wegzuhalten. Europa muss sehr aufpassen, dass nicht in Nationalistendebatten auseinanderdriftet, und es muss auch die freiheitliche Leitidee Europas immer hochgehalten werden.
Many parties which were previously considered beyond the pale are gradually becoming more moderate or are being accepted as potential partners.
So an integration of anti-establishment parties into the mainstream can be expected, at least in parts. But will the popularity of anti-establishment movements continue to rise?
This is a trend which is not simply to do with, say, the Eurozone crisis or the global recession, but is something which is a fairly long-term trend which has been developing for at least 20 or 30 years. So I think it will continue. We'll see more fragmented politics. We'll see more anti-establishment parties. That said, we shouldn't underestimate how robust and how tough mainstream parties are. Particularly in Western Europe, they're getting smaller, they're having greater difficulties in managing electorates, but they're pretty tough animals. So yes, it will continue, but it's a long-term process.
The rise of anti-establishment parties is likely to continue as a trend, at least for as long as the issues of immigration, EU membership and unemployment are central to public debate throughout Europe, and mainstream parties fail to offer solutions convincing disillusioned voters. With Pegida struggling to find a new committee, Syriza winning the Greek elections, and Ukip and Podemos preparing for upcoming elections, it remains to be seen what the outcome will be for each individual country.